I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Today on the show we make some controversial statements about the art of spirit making and what it means to apply some of the technological opportunities available now. John's business, Deviant Distilling, revolves around capitalising on some of these. He explains how they reduce the environmental impact of the process, the science behind distilling, and the inner workings behind building a distillery. As I mentioned, we do make a couple of comments that are likely to polarize you, so chances are if you are a traditionalist, you might get a bit cranky. But if you go in with an open mind to innovation, we'll all get excited together. Welcome to episode 27. Hello and welcome to the show, John.
G'day, how are you?
Very well, thank you, mate. I'm very well. Thank you for joining us today. Mate, my first question that I always like to open the show with is by asking if you have a crazy hospitality story.
I do. I'm not sure if it's suitable for all audiences though.
That's okay. Look, I'll tell you, let's redirect the question. I normally have to redirect this. I might even change the intro question. Is what have you seen a patron do that's weird and wonderful, exciting, interesting, something strange?
So I was a bartender for about 4 years, and during that time, when I was first starting out, when I was a glassy, someone came up to the glassy station while the manager was standing next to me, and they said, "Oh, look, some girls made a bit of a mess in the toilet. Can you go check it out?"
Mm-hmm.
And the manager's kind of gone in, said, "That's all right, I'll take care of this." Just walked out a few seconds later. And he said he's just kind of walked up to another bartender. He's like, "Oh, mate, a bit of a mess in the toilet. Do you reckon you can go and clean it up? Nothing major." Next person's gone in, come back out, spoken to me. Said, "Oh, mate, look, sorry, I'm a bit busy, but can you just go check out the girls' bathroom? Blah, blah, blah." So I've walked in there, had a look at the wall, and someone had just smeared their own shit all over the walls.
Oh, that is...
Just like a handful of it.
That is awful.
I've walked in, I've taken one look, and I was like, yep, all right, good. Walked out, walked back along, saw someone not doing too much, said, "Oh, mate, look, manager's just asked me if you can go and check out the girls' bathroom. Someone's made a bit of a mess in there, apparently." Walked off. The buck went the whole way down the line.
Oh, I think anyone who's been a glassy has dealt with those sorts of issues. But even as a bartender, I mean, sometimes, there are some horrendous things that we have to deal with.
It never ceases to amaze me what people can do to a bathroom.
Thank you for that filthy story. I love it. I want to also, so the next question that I like to ask you is why you do what you do.
Yeah, fair enough. I suppose that's a fair question. So for people who don't know what I do, I am a whiskey distiller who doesn't make whiskey. We developed our own process and we age the product. We still use exactly the same ingredients, barley, water, yeast and oak. But we don't use barrels. And the net result is that instead of using barrels, or without using barrels, we're able to reduce the aging time down to about 10 weeks instead of, years.
Okay.
And the reasons for that are multifaceted. The primary one is the environmental side of it. We produce less than 10% of the waste of a comparable distillery.
Yeah, right. So what is it about that creates that huge reduction?
So there are a number of factors involved, but one of the main ones is, or perhaps the main one is, that when you age product in a barrel, especially in Australia, evaporation takes place every year, and the Angel Share takes a reasonable cut out in a place like Australia, where we've often got very dry, very warm air. Once that's added up, over the course of 5 to 10 years, a distiller has lost anything up to 50%, or sometimes even more than 50% of what they originally put in the barrel.
Really?
So all the resources, all the power, all the man hours that went into producing that spirit has just gone straight out the door. Now, from one point of view, people can talk about how that's part of the art and that's part of the process. It doesn't have to be that way. And we're reaching a point now where a lot of the industry, whereas there are some people who do incredible things to make their distilleries very environmentally friendly and completely eliminate waste, overall, the industry is reaching a point where it's just not very sustainable. If it continues to grow, the environmental toll will just become more and more significant.
So I love the depth of the technicality that can be involved there. I really want to delve even deeper and understand why it is that you're passionate about that. What is it that inspires you to create more innovative techniques to, I suppose, to help the environment?
I suppose I have a bit of a my background professionally, apart from doing a bit of bartending, was in science.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that's always bothered me is when people do things a certain way simply because that's the way it's done, as opposed to doing some experiments and finding out if there's a better way of doing it, or making a change and shaking things up. In this instance, a lot of people have very strong emotional connections to the aging of spirits and the aging of wines.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask a little bit about that later in the episode.
But I suppose the aging of spirits, or whiskey in particular, is believed to have come about by accident. People were transporting freshly made spirit from point A to point B, and they realised that by the time it got to point B, after spending 2 or 3 months on a bumpy road in a barrel, it tasted better than when it left the distillery. And the whole concept of aging has sprung up around that. Now, it just so happens that barrels, by a fluke of luck, do a very good job at aging products. It does take, up to a decade or even double that for the barrels to really do a good job of it. And this process was discovered by accident. Now, whereas, as I said before, a lot of people have very strong emotional connections to the issue, at some point people do need to kind of step back and say, well, hold on. This is a process that was developed by accident. It's great that it gets this net result, but surely there's a better way to do this. Something that's been specifically designed for the purpose of aging spirit must be better than something that just does it accidentally.
That's a really interesting perspective, and also, I suppose, counter-argument to the traditionalist view, because people can get incredibly fired up about the fact that some of these new ways to age don't include a barrel, or they're they're not the old spirit, it's like not an aged spirit or whatever. And my particular stance is that if it has the same outcome, it tastes just as good, then it's effectively the same spirit. And I'll make a lot of people angry by saying that, but I'm very much interested in creating a higher quality product, and maybe we can create higher quality products by using new processes. So that's the stance I take on it. But it also, I suppose, destroys the romantic nature of that traditional approach to aging a spirit. So what's your perspective on that?
Look, that's I suppose, a bit of a loaded question in some ways, because if I say the wrong things, I think I'll get some very upset people sending me messages. But yeah, look, it's difficult. It is difficult for me because I am in two minds about it. From a scientific perspective, I feel that if it's the same thing, it's the same thing. An artistic perspective, I see a difference. I do. I even though I'm one of the people who make, the differently aged spirit, I do still see and appreciate the art in knowing that what you're drinking was born 10 years ago. I think one of the easiest ways to link back to this would be to look at a study that I read a long time ago when I was first kind of looking at how to do this, and it was concerning wine. And what they did in this study was get both amateurs and sommeliers. It was a double-blind study, so no one knew which wine they were tasting, and they were simply asked to rate the wine on a few different characteristics, but principally what they thought tasted better. Overwhelmingly, both the sommeliers and the amateur wine enthusiasts chose wine that had been aged with oak chips over wine that had been aged in barrels. However, when they were aware of how the wine had been aged, the results were almost reversed.
Right.
And it shows a lot about how there's this kind of indoctrination about how this is the right way to do it, when the evidence shows that it perhaps isn't. As much as people can be attached to it, whenever someone tries to step aside from that, they're often scorned. I find it very interesting that the principal concern isn't what tastes best; it is what's perceived as being best.
Mm. And is that the process that you guys use as well? Do you use oak chips instead of the barrel, or?
I mean, obviously, yeah, we don't use barrels in our process. We use specific cuts of oak. Look, to be honest, the easiest way to describe it would be to say that we use oak chunks or oak chips of a specific kind of shape and design. And one of the key benefits to that is that we do get away with using a lot less oak as well.
Obviously, yes. It's, as you said, cuts down on the environmental factor involved there. I'm also very interested in the way that you do things, because my very first episode on the show was with Alexander Bell, who also has a process of aging spirits really quickly. So, But he uses a process of using esterification, which I tried to sort of uncover a little bit in that episode, and I'm still learning more about that myself. But is that a different process to what you do?
I'm not actually that familiar with his process. So when you say esterification, it is so when you age a spirit, you start off with your base spirit. There'll be some fusel oils in it. If we're talking about whiskey, for instance, there'll be a couple of different species of alcohol, but overwhelmingly it'll be ethanol. If it's peated, there'll be some phenols in there. There may be some phenols in there if it was direct fired, if the still was direct fired or something as well. And those products, when they come in contact with oak, they go and they oxidize. They go through a series of reactions. So one of the first things that happens is that aldehydes will be extracted from the oak, and these are things like vanillin, syringe aldehyde, furfural. They're very common flavors. Vanillin obviously has a vanilla kind of flavor. Furfural, grassy kind of tone. Now these compounds can also be formed from the oxidation of alcohols. And from there, with further oxidation, they'll turn into fatty acids. And from there, either by the input of energy or through a really long time taking place, esterification will happen. And that's where you get the richer, fruitier flavours and aromas. It is a reaction that usually requires a reasonable amount of energy in this particular kind of system. And when you have a static system like a barrel, it's one of the reasons why it takes so long to reach that really high-end product, as opposed to a just get by product. There's very little external energy being put into the system. Now, how this other person was achieving esterification, I'm unsure. But I suppose in a roundabout way, you could say that that's what we're doing. We put energy into the system to encourage these reactions to take place.
I might have to get him to comment on his a bit more, because the show's evolved a lot since then, and I'd love to maybe get his input on what he's doing, and sort of a bit of commentary on what's going on, because it's obviously an interesting process, and there's some technological advancement happening, and people are starting to do similar things to what you're doing. So did you stumble upon the process, or was it a matter of research and having methodical steps to discovering how to power age a spirit?
It started off as most things do with the Google search, but unfortunately, very, very early on, something happened that had never happened before, which was we kind of reached the edge of Google.
The edge, yeah, I like that.
There just wasn't. There were some very interesting ideas being thrown around on different forums, but there just weren't any real ideas or concepts out there on how to achieve this. And so from there, I kind of looked at, we did do a bit of kind of basic chemistry, and we looked at what reactions would need to take place. And we looked at what the difference is between new make spirit and an aged whiskey and something that's on its way to being whiskey, like what changes are taking place throughout that process.
Mm-hmm.
And then we looked at how we can encourage those reactions to take place. Well, I suppose this might not be the best way to word it, because those reactions want to take place. We just looked at how to create an environment that allows those reactions that want to happen easily.
I do really like the edge of Google, because I think that's when you find that you've got an idea that is really innovating, that's really sort of pioneering where the future is, because there's not much or there's no discussion on that concept yet. So that's a really exciting place to be when you can't find any information that you want to find out. It's also a frustrating time, but really cool that you pushed forward with that.
Well, it was, like I said, it's not a problem we often come across nowadays, reaching the edge of Google. But yeah, it was interesting. It didn't occur to me that it wasn't something that was common practice until I reached that point. I just assumed that this was a problem that had already been solved.
So how did you go about working through that? How did you look for the answers after that?
So I suppose after we'd kind of figured out what reactions needed to take place, and having had a background in chemistry, I had a reasonable idea or reasonable approximation of what would need to happen, or how we could encourage that to happen. So we conducted a series of, I think it ended up being close to about 100 experiments on using oak in different ways, different temperatures, changing the atmosphere, things like the amount of oxygen, adding movement, adding flow, all kinds of different ideas, until we kind of ended up with a selection of things that worked and a selection of things that didn't work. And after we had the processes that worked, it was about how to put those processes together in the most practical way to create the best tasting product that we could.
And tell us a bit more about the distillery and how you got started. So did you just, like, it's not quite as easy as just going, oh yeah, I'm going to start a distillery. Like, how did you do that?
So when the idea first came about, I was working at another very well-known Tasmanian distillery. So I had a background there in the whiskey making process, which I'm very thankful for. But what I didn't have a good understanding of, which I think I've learned the hard way now, is just how difficult it is to get something like a distillery off the ground. I suppose with our technology, we do have some advantages in terms of getting that cash flow in the first few years that a normal whiskey distillery just wouldn't have. But it took a lot of hard work and a lot of money to get something off the ground, even as small as what our current distillery is. But something I remember reading very early on a forum where someone was talking about wanting to start a craft brewery, and someone had said to them, however much money you think it's going to cost you at this stage, times that by 5, and that'll be roughly it. I remember thinking, I've costed everything out. I know where this is going to be. It's going to end up costing about this much. As I was reading that, and at the moment, it's worked out to be about 5 times that amount.
Okay, well, it's a good little rule of thumb there.
Pretty bang on the money. But I think for anyone out there who's looking at starting, their own distillery, however much money and however much time they think it's going to take, after really planning it out thoroughly, times that by 5, and you'll be about there.
I like that. So take notes, anyone who wants to start a distillery. Okay, cool. Well, look, I sort of want to move on to the next stage of the show, which is sort of the questions that I have that I ask every guest. And I want to ask you, what innovations or innovative techniques have you seen in the industry outside of what you're doing?
So some of the things that I am really interested in, they're coming out of a lot of the larger distilleries, especially in Scotland at the moment, where they've had a real environmental push. Things like biodigesters, which consume the organic waste left over from the distillation process, which there is a lot of, and they turn that into biomethane, and that biomethane is then often used on site either to fire the stills directly or to produce electricity. And a number of distilleries are producing almost the entirety of their electricity needs through the gas that they generate from their own waste.
Yeah, wow.
And the net result of that being obviously that instead of that waste being discharged to the environment, it's being repurposed.
Mm. And obviously, there's entropy involved, so we can't contain all of the energy, but minimizing what energy is wasted is incredible. So how much energy is actually contained within the system when we do use these sorts of natural processes?
So it's a bit difficult to kind of give any kind of figure. Every distillery and every system's a little bit different. But with the aid of some solar panels on the roof, our distillery is on the verge of being energy neutral.
Wow. Okay.
Now, we are a very small distillery. I do need to add that in. We are tiny. However, everything that we use at the moment is completely scalable.
That's fantastic. So I'd love to see how that occurs as you grow, and how much you are able to contain there within the system. That's really awesome. Awesome to be almost energy neutral. Really, really cool. Obviously, you've got a really strong stance on being on that approach, environmentally conscious. Is that something that you guys are very aware of and look at moving forward?
As a brand or as a business, it's something that we are really focused on. Now, obviously, not everyone is going to want to adopt the kind of aging practices that we use, but there are other technologies like the biodigestion, for instance, that are, in relative terms, quite easy to implement. Almost everyone in our industry could implement if they had the will to do. I think one thing we really want to do is show that you don't need to have pocketfuls of cash to get these projects off the ground and be more environmentally conscious. We created a system that recycles our condenser water. So to put it in perspective, a distillery with a 2,500 litre still will have about 4 million litres of tap water come in and out of the condenser each year, and it'll go straight down the drain. We can reduce that by about 95%.
Wow. Okay.
The technology to do that is very simple and it's readily available. It's just a matter of kind of showing people, look, this is how you do it. You just need to put that little bit of money in up front. It's quite reasonable, and you can push ahead and keep moving things in that direction.
So how are you going about showing the industry about these innovations that you believe should take place? Are you just leading the way by doing it and then saying, hey guys, this is what we're doing, you should do that too? Or are you using another process?
Look, at this stage, as I've said a couple of times, we're still a tiny, tiny operation. As we grow, it will become more evident, and we will be able to show these things to other people. And anyone who's interested is more than welcome to come and have a look, see how it works and copy it for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
However, at this stage, we are in more of a research and development kind of cycle. We're about trying to get things as efficient and as squared off as we possible before we really start to grow.
Mm-hmm. And when did you guys start?
So I suppose the idea first started floating around in August 2015, late 2015.
Mm-hmm.
However, we didn't really start actually working properly on the project until about March 2016. So it's been almost 2 years that we've really been working on the project.
Yes, I see. What is your number one resource that you've used on your journey?
Look, it's going to sound like a corny answer, but I'm going to have to say the people around me. I wouldn't say I've used them, but look, the advice that I've been offered by people in the industry and friends who have backgrounds in hospitality, and their experience has really kind of shaped how we've developed and how we've grown. And having that resource there has been invaluable.
Is there anyone who you've worked with more closely who's been a bit of maybe a bit of a mentor for you to help you work through those complex decisions?
No, there hasn't been any one individual. And I suppose one of the most difficult things we've found in getting to where we are has been that because this is the road less traveled, because it's not something people have really done before, there's not anyone I can kind of ring up and ask for advice on what step to take next. There's no one who can kind of say, oh yeah, we had that problem, this is what we did. It's one of the perils, I suppose, of being a pioneer or trying to innovate, is that you're one of the first people to take those steps. And whereas I've had some great support and great advice as far as the taste of spirit is concerned, we've unfortunately been somewhat on our own in terms of developing, our aging process and the distillery itself. And I suppose there have been some benefits to that. You are forced to think outside the box, and you're forced to think and forced to act, as opposed to just resigning yourself to seeking advice every time you run into an issue.
Yes. So it's difficult to be pioneering that way forward, but there must be people that you can reach out to who've been very innovative in the industry. And do you bounce off other people who you find are innovating in their own way? And is there anyone that you'd like to comment on who is, creating their own innovation in the industry?
Look, there's a figure, Peter Bignell from Belgrove Distillery. I haven't had any real communication with him, but he's always been a figure who I've greatly admired the work of. He's recently released, I think it's called Kissing a Stranger, which is a brandy-like product. It's not actually brandy. That was produced by distilling the leftover wine from a wine tasting event. But he's done a lot of very innovative products, or created a lot of very innovative products, and he has a somewhat similar mentality in hating waste. We go about eliminating waste in very different ways, but he has a somewhat similar mentality in how he looks at things from why is it done this way, why this way, as opposed to just doing things the way that they've always been done.
Yeah, I really like that too. And Peter Bignell was actually mentioned by another guest on the show. That's fantastic. I think maybe I'll have to have a chat with Peter at some stage. But look, my next question for you, John, is what's your biggest challenge right now?
The biggest challenge for us right now, I suppose, is looking at how we grow, as well as, I suppose, some of the conceptual issues that I discussed before, with regards to people having these preconceived notions about what the product will be like before they taste it. Or preconceived, one of the biggest issues is people thinking that this is the easy route. All of the work in creating the spirit is exactly the same. We brew and distill by hand. It takes me about 70 hours a week to produce the quantity of product that we produce. It's definitely not the easier way of doing it. It takes constant work and constant input, as opposed to just relying on the barrel to do the work.
But I suppose it's if you're cutting down on years of wait time, is that extra work worth it? I think people would argue both ways, as we sort of brought up earlier in the episode.
Yeah.
Ultimately, John, I want to ask you, where do you want to be? What's your dream for Deviant?
Look, obviously, we want to take over the world. No, look, I enjoy doing what I do. I really like working with some backyard science. I like being able to do science where I can work with my hands. And I enjoy making products. We have a gin, and we have some ginger liqueur that's in development as well at the moment, and a few other branches coming out. And I think regardless of whether Deviant Distillery becomes a global giant, or whether it stays this little novelty in the corner of Tasmania, I'm going to be happy as long as I can keep creating new things and keep creating products I can be proud of.
Awesome. I can see the passion that you have for making spirits. What plans do you have for the industry and the way that you want to contribute to hospitality?
Well, look, one of the key elements for us in putting together the brand was trying to create something that bartenders liked and could connect with.
Mm.
I suppose one of the biggest changes that I've really liked seeing in recent times has been that instead of people going out to drop 10 vodka Red Bulls, they'll go out and they'll have a nice cocktail. They'll try a boutique gin. They'll try a unique product from a unique distillery. And I really liked seeing that growth of people forming a relationship with the product instead of just figuring out how to get it into their system as quickly as possible. And in terms of in the hospitality sector, I really like to see that kind of mentality continue to grow and foster, and do anything I can to work with bars and hospitality individuals to keep promoting that relationship with the product.
Yeah, what is it that's creating that change, that social change?
Look, I think it's a very complex change that's taking place, and I don't think there's really any one answer. A number of times I've heard it referred to as the Mad Men effect, where sociologists have speculated that changing pop culture influences. Things like shows like Mad Men, seeing people drinking high-end spirits and fancy cocktails, have led the new generation to thinking of alcohol as something that you enjoy as opposed to something that you just drink as quickly as you can. And I can only speculate, but I would imagine, these changing pop culture influences and the changing in people's drinking habits are kind of all feeding into each other. And what's trendy now is for someone to be sitting out on a rooftop bar drinking a Tasmanian gin and tonic, as opposed to being, as I said before, 10 vodka Red Bulls in.
I suppose they've all got their time and place. Yeah, but I really like that people are enjoying the quality of a spirit and understanding the story behind it and why they're drinking it. I suppose, it's not just about drinking to get drunk. So I really like that. I think we'll wrap it up there for today, John. I've really enjoyed having you on the show and thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do and how you pioneer the future of distilling.
Cheers, thank you. It's been great to be on board.
Thanks, John.
Stay in touch with the show after hours at Hospopreneurs on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Do you know a hospopreneur? Shoot us an email, hospopreneurs@gmail.com. Creativity and innovation in hospitality. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.